The Resident Evil canon's never been perfect, and it was thrown out completely out of whack with the remakes of Resident Evils 2 and 3. But thanks to one of you, my opinion might be changing, and so should yours. Welcome back to the world of survival horror. In the original days, the canon was never perfect, but there was an established order of events. It started with the mansion incident, then Raccoon City, and Resident Evils 2 and 3, Outbreak, all interconnected, and they told a coherent story, the downfall of the city. They were excellently done and had a ton of world building, and plenty of environmental storytelling. Side stories such as Survivor added to this narrative, expanded the established lore. The story took a different direction with Resident Evil 4 before returning for some loose ends to be tied up in Resident Evil 5.
Only one truly capable of being a god deserves that right.
Overall, it might not have been perfect, but we knew that the story was rich and detailed. We looked forward to each subsequent entry or spin-off that built out that world. If you ever wanted to do a deep dive into the lore of Resident Evil, I highly recommend you check out the Resident Evil podcast's Mythology. It's a complete timeline by the Batman, and I'll pop a link in the description. It's that big box right underneath the like button. With the remake of 1, the original story was expanded and new interesting details were added. What's great about this is that the part of the original story that didn't make it into the original game for budget or production reasons. As the series moved forward, the direct tie-ins such as Survivor, Outbreak, they stopped. However, side stories such as Revelations or the CGI movies filled the gaps between the main numbered titles.
Time to light you up!
And it gave us a glimpse of what our favourite characters had been caught up in between. Resident Evil 1 has 2 different scenarios. Follow-up games established that events from both scenarios existed. Barry survived from Jill's campaign and Rebecca survived from Chris's campaign. Yet neither of these show up in the same campaign, and both Chris and Jill can't be locked in the cell at the same time. So how do we tell an accurate depiction of events inside the mansion? Resident Evil 2 suffers from the same issue. It's generally regarded that Claire A and Leon B is the most canonical version of the game, as Sherry is the only one that's infected by the G-Virus in this situation.
I have the antidote. If I give it to her. Wake up! Please wake up! Claire? Where am I?
It worked!
A detail that's referenced again in Resident Evil 6.
So, you always been like that? The whole healing thing?
My dad was a scientist. He was working on BOWs when I was exposed. Luckily, I was treated with the vaccine before it was too late. But the virus adjusted and adapted. It's been a part of me ever since.
However, dialogue between Leon and Ada differs, and flashbacks of Claire facing Burke in G1 appear in Degeneration, a situation that can only happen in Claire B. Even Resident Evil 1 remake versus its original counterpart isn't safe. Barry Burton makes a reappearance as a playable character in Revelations 2. He looks like an older version of Remake 1's character model and carries a Samurai's Edge, a custom handgun that was featured in the remake. However, when playing as Claire, she makes reference to the Jill sandwich line that Barry used in the original.
Yeah, I was almost a Claire sandwich.
Does Barry tell everyone that story?
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right!
Barry doesn't quite say the same in remakes, so which version of Barry are we playing?
A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
With all these instances, you might have to just, headcanon them. You make it fit in your own mind of what happened. For me, when I'm doing my canon run, I'll always play 0 first.
That must be the old mansion that Enrico was talking about.
And then I'll do Jill's version of Remake 1. I then headcanon to say Rebecca was picked up in the woods, heading towards the mansion as they were leaving. So that way they all get out alive. To me, that's the only way it fits. It's not ideal, but it restricts you to play in a certain way. But at least you get a coherent story. I've played that way for years, always picking and choosing the parts of Resident Evil I wanted to fit within my own canon. The problem with this approach is that it fuels controversy. The originals are better than the remakes, or you can't pick and choose which parts you like, such as the Umbrella Chronicles, or is Umbrella's End canon but Raccoon's Destruction non-canon because it tells a different version of Resident Evil 2. On one hand, I love it when they tell a fluid story with a set start, middle and end, but keeping it that way would cut out any creativity Capcom have previously experimented with. Resident Evil 2 is a masterpiece, building on the two versions of the original Resident Evil instead of two identical stories with just different protagonists and a few tweaks here and there. You get the same story but from two different perspectives, and with the actions on one side affecting the other side's playthrough. Yes, granted there are a few crossovers, but essentially two games in one, and needing you to complete both to get the true ending. A similar way was tried again in Revelations 2 by having Barry and Claire visit the same place, only this time 6 months apart. Resident Evil 3 experimented further by having live choices and changing the story ever so slightly to fit the narrative you have chosen. Now, I read everything that you say in the comment section and I do try to reply to as many as I possibly can. But this comment from my Resident Evil 0 video, linked at the end if you want to watch it yourself, jumped out at me and it really struck a chord. At Fred Jones 2170 said, "I really don't think that we should get too worried about the specifics of what canon is in Resident Evil. This series has never had a definitive version of events. See RE1 and RE3 Nemesis. I'm personally glad that Capcom's deliberately left things vague and open to the player interpretation. It almost gives the RE story a choose-your-own-adventure feeling, allowing players to take the canon whichever permutation of the timeline they find most compelling, whether that's the remakes version of events, one of the original's many branching paths, or some mix of the two. I personally think that loose approach to canon is really cool, and the worst thing that Capcom could do is definitively say that the remakes and the originals are two separate universes or whatever. I think doing so would needlessly limit the series' storytelling potential by preventing the originals and the remakes from both contributing to and enhancing the story. At the end of the day though, it really doesn't matter and I really don't think it should." And as Fred Jones is absolutely right. Resident Evil Remake 3 stripped away the life choices, and Resident Evil 7 and 8 just told linear stories. Part of Resident Evil's charm is that it doesn't quite fit. It doesn't quite make sense. This fuels discussion and admittedly sometimes it's negative. You will always get someone claiming that one version is better than the other, but for the most part it's positive. People theorising what story elements could mean or sharing their own headcanon, such as I did earlier with Rebecca. Throughout your conversations, just have a think back. Have you talked more about the different permutations of Resident Evil 2 and or its remake, or Resident Evil 7 with its single linear story? If the plan moving forward is to stick to traditional storytelling with no room for ambiguity, then it's going to cut out a huge section of the fans who actually enjoy talking about all the different possibilities, or going through all the supplemental material and seeing what would fit and what doesn't. Yes, we would get a bit more of a coherent story, but the question really becomes, would it make the franchise, well, boring? Reading this comment has got me wondering my own position on canon, and you can see I cared quite a bit for it in the video that's on screen now. Don't forget to hit the like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you survivors next time.